Yeah, so I threw the notes together here in this gist, what I thought we could walk through today. And let's take a look at the fully baked version, which I think you guys have looked at this in weeks past, but it's always a great review for sure. But it's an ATM where we can enter an amount and deposit it. We can also withdraw money. If we try to withdraw more than we have, nothing happens. The button doesn't work. The other cool thing that this does is if we have money in our savings account, it will give us overdraft protection. So if I want to withdraw like 30 bucks, then I have zero in my checking, but it takes the remainder out of the savings. So the other thing this does is if we have a zero balance, the background is red, and anything positive, or if a balance exists, the red goes away. So we're going to be changing a class as well. And to start this, we have some starter code if you guys want to do a poll here. And the link is in the gist, clone starter code for the ATM exercise. So if you click on that, you should have access to this repo. And go ahead and do a git clone, and we'll get started on that. Do you guys need any help git cloning or walking through that process? That's pretty good? Cool. So I'm going to clone this as well so I have a clean slate. Oops. And then I'll go ahead and double dot and get that whole thing up and running. Give you guys a few seconds for that. Alright, so I'm going to open up my index and my JavaScript file just for starters. And let's take a look at the instructions here. So this application uses jQuery. I thought what we would do is today we're going to take a look at this using vanilla JavaScript just to get our feet wet. Tomorrow, if we have time, what we'll do is we'll refactor this into jQuery. How do you guys feel about jQuery, like a fist to 5, 5 being rockstar, 1 being like use some solid review? Okay, 3s and 4s. Okay, good. So we're going to touch on jQuery tomorrow. We'll probably refactor this, and then I have another exercise, kind of a Jedi lightsaber exercise that we can do. Have you guys done any kind of Jedi lightsaber exercises? Does that ring a bell? You have? Okay. I'll get with Jesse. So in Atlanta, we have Jedis and Siths. So we only have a WDI and a UXDI going on right now. You guys have a lot of stuff going on. So they chose Jedi, so we're the Siths. So we have Star Wars themed exercises. You guys do you guys have a theme for your class? Because Robert was AKA Robin, right? Huh? Lemon chiffon.
Yes. I was going to say we actually have internal names. It's
okay, I just assumed
squad names.
Squad names. Okay, I thought maybe when I saw Robin, I was like, is it a Batman theme up here? So let's take a look at the user stories. There's a couple of things we want to accomplish. We're going to go through 2 of these together and then give you guys some time to hack independently, or if you want to pair program. But as a user, I want to deposit money into one of the bank accounts. As a user, I want to withdraw money from one of the bank accounts. We also want to make sure the balance in an account can't go negative. So if a user tries to withdraw more money, the button just doesn't work. The click event doesn't work. Also want overdraft protection. So we have to consider what happens when the user wants to withdraw more money from the checking account than he has in the checking account. We want to be able to pull from the savings account as well. And we're going to work on the color of the bank account to reflect its balance. So there's already a CSS rule in place, a CSS class called 0. So we're going to play around with that. It's in our CSS file. And then we're also going to take a look at how to dry up or refactor the code. So we're going to walk through refactoring the CSS and depositing money. That very first user story. So if we go back to the gist, any questions about that? What we're going to do? So we're just going to get our, to start, we're going to get our deposit button working so we can add money to our account. When we are positive, we're going to make the red class go away. So that's what we're going to focus on first. So let's scroll down to, actually let's start at this quick review. So I just want to do quick review of DOM manipulation. So if I wanted, using JavaScript, if I wanted to go to CNN, and let's say that I wanted to manipulate or change the content of this race about to get real. Let's say I wanted to change that to, you know, J Rules or, you know, Go Wizards, whatever is Washington, D.C. specific. How could I go about changing the text right here? First of all, if I wanted to find out what element this race about to get real, because there's a lot of stuff on here. If I just wanted to find that element, figure out what's going on under the hood, how could I pinpoint that element really quickly using our dev tools?
Like hover over after you bring up the console.
Yeah, so we could click our kind of inspect element there, and then click on that, and that will quickly get us to that particular element. So yeah, hopefully you guys are using the dev tools a lot. They're very helpful. So we pinpointed the element. If I wanted to change that race about to get real to some other piece of text, could one of you guys suggest a way to do that using JavaScript? We could totally go in here and like, you know, double click and change it, but if we wanted to do it a JavaScripty way, how might we think about that? So there's a couple of ways to approach this. Maybe the simplest way is, let's see if we can, first of all, it has a class name. So let's see if we can grab all the elements with this particular class using JavaScript. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to copy this class. Then let's go to the console. And if I wanted to grab all the elements by a class name, how could I do that in the console using JavaScript?
Get element, this document, get element by.
Yep. Is it going to be elements or elements?
It's element, right? Oh,
For,
I mean, I see element by ID and I see elements by class name.
yeah, so why is it element singular with an ID and elements with a class?
Because the ID are specifically like
Yeah.
particular element.
Yeah, so the idea, remember, IDs we only want to have on one element. So JavaScript's assuming it's going to be one element we're going to get by an ID. Classes you can put on multiple elements and objects and such. So therefore it's plural. So let's grab that, and then I'll take the class name that I copied from the DOM and paste it in there. And voila. So what did that return? What are these little square bracket items here?
You just return like the whole HTML.
Yeah, it returned that particular object from the DOM, but specifically it returned an array, right?
Alright.
So since we're getting elements by class name, it's going to return an array of those elements. Now it just so happens, it looks like there's only one element with this class name. That being said, it's still going to return an array. So when we use arrays, how do we access specific items within an array? What do we use for that?
This the index.
Yeah, we use an index. So in this case, again, even though we only have one object in our array, we're still going to need to use an index to access it. So I'm going to pop the 0 index because I want to grab the first and only one. So that's going to be my first. Cool. So when we do the 0 index, it goes ahead and pulls out that one object from the array. So now we just have it by itself. Cool. So we pinpointed the object we want to manipulate. How could we change the text of that element? So there may be a couple of ways, but let's try out this inner HTML. And then let's just make some text here. Hello, WDI. And if we run that, returns a string, and we see that we use JavaScript to manipulate our DOM. So now we have hello, WDI right here. So what's going to happen if I refresh the page?
It's going to go back when it loads.
Yeah, why is that? Did we just manipulate the HTML or the DOM, the document object model? Kind of, sort of. So the HTML is the file, the information that we get from CNN.com. So your browser gets that HTML file and it renders the DOM. So right here, this is an example. If we go to elements. So all this garbage in here, so this is the DOM. It's a model that the browser rendered of the HTML. So what we just did is we changed some text to the document object model, and when we refresh, the HTML has not been changed, only the model itself. So when we refresh, we get that HTML again from CNN.com. It recreates a new model, and everything's back to normal. So yeah, that delineation, the difference between the HTML information and the document object model is going to be really, really important concept, particularly when we manipulate the DOM like we did here. So is everyone able to change some text? Okay. So this is just a really simple example, but it's that idea that we can go into the DOM, we can grab elements, and this is what we're going to do today with JavaScript and tomorrow with jQuery. jQuery will be a little slicker, a little more succinct. Yeah?
How are we able to find that HTML?
That specific element?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways you could do it. You could like try to find that needle in this haystack of code, but the Chrome DevTools are really helpful. Yeah, so I just clicked on that inspect element and clicked on it specifically. Yeah. And again, it's just a coincidence that this particular element, even though it was a class, it just so happens there's only one class with this specific class on it. But regardless, we get an array of objects. In this case, there was only one object that matched the criteria, but the principle is the same.
How did you know to write 0 within the square brackets?
Yeah, let's take a look at that. So we agreed that classes can be on more than one element, right? So that's why this jQuery method get elements by class name. So it's going to look for all the elements with this class name. So when we run this, we get an array of elements, right? It just so happens that this particular class, there's only one of them. Let's take a look. Let's try to grab another class that there would be multiple elements on. These are probably going to have some sort of class on them. Okay, so let's take a look at this one, CD headline text. Okay, good. Well, so this class name has a collection of 143 items, right? And if we open that, whew, that's a lot of stuff. But essentially, this is a collection. What data type is this collection? With the square brackets. What's an array, right? So it returns that collection as an array of objects. So if I wanted to grab the first object from this collection, how would I do that? Yeah. So here's the first one right here. Candidates in sprint mode with key contest weeks away. So if I just wanted to specifically grab that one, I could put index 0. Like, just give me the first one of this array. And so this is really a really cool concept. So when we have objects or hashes, how do we access information in hash data types? Like in Ruby or something. So if we have mark, so how can I access the name in this mark object?
Like mark.name.
Yeah, mark.name. On a higher level, with hashes, these object data types, we use keys and values. Could we use an index in this object? Would an index be valid if we did like mark index 0? Yeah, it wouldn't work. And why wouldn't it work? So we have two main collection data types, right? We have arrays, and then we have hashes. Well, in Ruby we call them hashes. In JavaScript we probably refer to them more as objects. But the principle is the same. So when we have objects, they're called associative arrays, or sometimes they're called dictionaries, because we can access them using the key value, like the key value pair. So we need to call the key to get the value, the corresponding value. Arrays, we call them using what? How do we access information in an array? So Tom already said it. Yeah, using indexes. Yeah, so if we wanted to grab this item in the array, we could do, mark 0 to grab the first one. And that's the same principle of what we did here. So when we called get elements by class name, grab me all the elements with this class name attached to it, we got 143 things back, right? And look at all that garbage. So we got 143. So we have an array of 143 things, right? No particular order. So the way that we would access the data items in this array is with an index. So in this case, we just wanted to grab the first one for funsies, which is what we did here. And that gives us the first object in that array. And it's in sprint mode with key contest. So it's right here, actually. So that's the first one. I'm pretty sure all of these are the same thing. They all have that same class.
And so they have just thrown a different ID, a second, like an additional ID or maybe a second class on some of those to, because it is, I think, what's the Clinton up the top, that breaking headline is one of them, if I remember correctly, and then everything on the left, the headlines and the navigation, but they're just doing some additional stuff to kind of.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a really dense, complex website, but it's kind of interesting. You can decipher what's going on. So they have classes, breaking news, this close button. They have a breaking news title, which has different properties, breaking news message. Yeah, a lot of different stuff. So you can add multiple classes to an object, right? To an element. And elements can have classes. They can also have IDs. Like all of this is valid for sure. Yeah, Dennis?
was
sure.
gonna say like the one on the left is more. You said on Rails. One on the left.
More what?
The key values. You use that more in Rails. You said.
Oh, in Rails, yeah. So in Rails, I mean, I call these, you know, like a hash.
Right. I was gonna say like because you can make more than one object, right? Because I know like, for example, in class like we were doing cars, so like it would be like car equal and then like model the car, make of the
Oh, yeah.
and stuff like that. You can make another one with a different model.
With different properties and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe in that example, maybe I have a person model, and maybe every person I create, I want them to have a name, an email, maybe an address, phone number, whatever.
How would we call it? Because like now you say you can call the name by mark that name, but if we did another one, like another object, how would we
Like a
call
Dennis
that?
object or something?
Yeah.
So,
Oh, it would be Dennis. Oh, okay, right, I get it.
yeah, then
Okay.
Dennis.name.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And even in Rails, you know, depending on the data type, you know, sometimes, you know, with JavaScript, sometimes you could do, you know, mark that name. Occasionally in Rails or Ruby, for example, you know, you may need to do it like this. Depending on the situation, sometimes with JSON, you know, but it's the same idea. You're accessing the keys to get the corresponding values out of an object. Yeah. And again, the reason I bring this up, just for this example, is that we're going to do this with the ATM exercise. So when a user inputs an amount, we're going to need to grab the value from that specific element so we can do our logic and stuff. So cool. Any questions about that? I love going on like CNN.com or something for the students and like putting in some goofy headline like, did you guys see this morning? Like, you know, Kobe retired. Well, he did retire, but anywho. All right, so just wanted to take a quick kick in the tires of selecting elements from the DOM. Now let's take a look at our actual ATM exercise. And to start, I like to do things very, you know, step by step. I can be really slow sometimes. So the first thing I think we should do is let's just see if we can get a click event working on an element, just with an alert, just something really basic. Let me go ahead and open up our sample, our starter code rather here. So if you guys want to open this up in the browser. And right now, none of these are working, but at least we have the HTML and CSS pre-built for us, so that'll be handy. And the first thing we want to do, so let's practice adding an event to an element. So let's add a click event to our deposit button, since that's the first thing we're gonna incorporate. Let's add an ID to that specific button element. So we want to go into our index.html, and let's find that button element, which is right here on line 18. And I'm going to create an ID on this button. And again, in the context of JavaScript, specifically with event handling, why would I want to put an ID on a button? What would be the benefit of that? So I see that I have 4 buttons on this page, so why would I want to put an ID on these buttons, specific IDs on these buttons? Yeah, if we were doing this by class or just putting a click event on a button, if we clicked any button, the same behavior would happen, but we want something specific for just this one. So I'm just going to call this checking deposit button. Or checking deposit, in that matter. Cool, so now we can access, again, just like we did with CNN, now we can grab the specific element and give it an event. So if we go to the JavaScript file, I'm going to delete, if you guys want to delete lines 1 and 2 and 5, just so we have a little bit of a cleaner canvas to play with. 1, 2, and 5, yeah. the lines of code that were commented out, we can just get rid of those for now. And let us add an event listener to that button. So similar to how we did, Tom, how would we add an event listener? Or first of all, how would we access that one button element? Very similar to what you did on CNN.com.
Yeah, let's see. Wouldn't that be document get element singular?
Yep,
by
good.
ID. What do we call that? Checking deposit?
Yeah, I called it checking deposit. So.
And then after the parens close, to move forward, is that dot on click?
Yeah, how would we? So that's going to grab that element. And how do we add an event handler in JavaScript? So here one thing we can do is add event listener. So on click or on, so that would be more of a jQuery thing, which we'll get to tomorrow, which is a much more succinct, nicer way to do it. But for JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, let's add an event listener, and then we need to pass in the specific event that we want to attach to that element. So in this case, I want to listen for a click event. Shrink this down a little bit. Cool, and then this also takes a callback function. So let's just create a basic function that will give us an alert when that's clicked. So how might we do that? Okay, so what would that look like? Something like this. Okay. Cool. All right. So when we click on it, hopefully it should say it's alive. So let's try that out. So we'll refresh. We hit deposit. And I probably misspelled it. I'm bad about spelling. Get element by ID, checking deposit. And you guys see what I did? So that should be lowercase. That's my bad. Cool. So we should all see an alert pop up when we click on our deposit buttons. Is anyone not getting this behavior?
What was your capitalization?
Yeah, so it's get element by ID. So it's capital I, lowercase d. I had capital D at the end of that one. Yeah, so this is kind of the basic structure for event listeners. You can use the method add event listener. You can pass in the type of event you want to listen for. What are some other events that we can listen for in JavaScript?
Event listener?
Yeah, just some examples.
Isn't there one where like when you click it, but then like when you lift up,
yeah,
go fire?
Yeah, so we could do like a key up, a key down.
Oh, right.
Yeah, there's I'm trying to think of the specific click on, click off. There's hovers, mouse overs, things like that. Yeah, so we would just want to pass in the specific event listener and then the callback function. So is everyone able to get an alert box working on their stuff? Okay. Let's take a peek. In the, if you want to take a look at that gist, I have the code. If you want to double check it. So let's check the checking deposit button. Let's check your console, see if there's any errors down there. Do you know to check your DevTools? Do you know the shortcut for that? Okay, so what line is that happening on? So when we create using JavaScript, so does JavaScript use camel case or snake case? Yeah, JavaScript uses camel case. So camel case looks like we usually have the first word is lowercase, and then every subsequent word is uppercase. So I think if you fix your C there, it should be good. Yeah. Cool. Armani, you good? Okay, cool. So yeah, so we tested out, we added an event listener, so we know that's working. That's awesome. What would be another way that we could write this get element by ID? So this is getting into a little bit of jQuery, which we'll touch on tomorrow. But have you guys played around with the query selector method? Okay. So just for demonstration purposes, if we wanted to use query selector instead of this get element by ID, how might we incorporate that? Cool. Okay, what else? Will we need to change anything else here? So if we use the query selector method, what else would we need to update? Yeah, why would we need to do that? Well, this is actually an ID, right? Oh, right. But get element by ID, JavaScript knows this is going to be an ID that we're passing in, so we don't need the hash. Query selector, when we get to JavaScript tomorrow, query selectors, when we get to jQuery tomorrow, query selector is essentially that $sign that we see in jQuery. That's really what's going on under the hood. So when we use query selector, it's really powerful because we can use the CSS selectors, so we can get really surgical with our stuff. So in this case, we need to designate that it's an ID of checking deposit that we're looking for. So it's a little more specific. And I think with our subsequent examples, we're going to use this query selector. I really like using that one.
So if you were just using checking deposit, would you consider it like just a string?
Actually, well, what do you guys think? Well, like in our CSS rules and such, if we have a CSS rule that doesn't have a period, doesn't have a hash, can you guys think of some examples when we, in CSS, when we don't have a period or a hash, anything like that before it? So what would JavaScript assume we're passing in here? Yeah, good. Yeah, so p tags, divs, body, right? Those tags, they're just pretty basic, right? We don't have a period or a $sign or anything, a hash. So I would assume that it would look for a tag called checking deposit. That's probably what it would do. Yeah, very good. So let's pop that back in there. And let's move on to our next step. So we got our listener working, so that's awesome. The next thing we want to do, let's update this checking deposit function, because that's what we want to fire. Ultimately, that's what we want to fire when we click that deposit button. So how can we move this alert logic into that function and then call that function in our event listener? How could we do that? Yeah, so we just tested out that our event listener is working, so we get that alert box. Ultimately, what we want to do is we're going to put some logic into our checking deposit function. So as a next step, let's move this alert and pop it into that function. And then when we click on this, it's going to call that function instead of this synonymous alert. So what would be maybe 2 steps that we could accomplish this? What would be the first thing if we wanted to pop that alert up there? We could probably just do something like that, right? Not too crazy. Cool, so we'll bump our alert up to our checking deposit function. what would we want to change in our event listener now? So that when we click the listener, it's going to hit that function instead of this anonymous one down here. What would we want to do? Yeah, we can tell it the function that we want to fire. Yeah. So previously we had an anonymous function here with our alert in it, right? So an event listener, you pass in the event, and you pass in a callback function. So you can put that function in here. You can assign it, you can tell it to fire this other thing, like whatever you want to do. So let's save that, and let's just see if we change that correctly. Cool. So we're getting the same behavior, but now our code's a little more dry, getting a little more advanced. So now we can start working on our logic in this checking deposit function. So is everyone able to get their alert into that function, and now you can call that function? Mohammed, did you get that? Get that going? So we moved our alert up here to line 2, and we just made our callback function the checking deposit. That's the one we're going to call. And actually, for now, if you guys want to, we're not going to play around with the amount right now, so we can delete that. It's not going to break anything, but did you get it working? Okay. Let me take a peek. How's it going? Mark. Matt. Yeah, I think I saw you in 4 earlier.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool, that was good. So now on, yeah, so there your event listener after click comma. Well, line 18. So right now we have that anonymous function after the click comma. So what do we want to put there instead of that anonymous function? So now we want the checking deposit function to fire, right? So let's get rid of that anonymous function right here and call the checking deposit function. So now when we click it, it's going to run our alert coming from the checking deposit function. Tommy, good?
I am good, yes, thank you.
Cool. All right, so we got our event listener working. We now have that checking deposit function working. So now we can throw some good stuff in there. So let's go back to our lesson, and let's get the checking deposit function working. So we changed our event listener to call the checking balance function when clicked. That should actually be checking deposit. That's my bad. A little bit of a typo there. I'll fix that. But the first thing we want to do is we want to grab the user input, right? So the user inputs an amount. Did you get it working?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I was like, I'm looking for checking balance, right?
Oh, that's what screwed you up. Yeah, my bad. My assistant didn't fact check my gist. Many lashings later. So the first thing, let's grab that user input. So we're getting into the DOM manipulation that we looked at earlier, with CNN.com and such. We want to grab the user input for the amount he or she wants to deposit. And we'll also want to create a variable for the balance. So let's add an ID to the input and write the code to capture the value. So we want to grab the user input from this input box right here. So it's probably a good idea to put an ID on that box, keeping with this theme of want to put very specific IDs on our elements so that we can use JavaScript to manipulate them and grab information from them. So right here on this input type text, let's create another ID. And what are we going to call this? Let's call it checking amount. And we're using camel case again. So we added an ID in our HTML. And now if we go back to our checking deposit function, so I want to assign this to a variable amount. So let's declare our variable. And then how would I grab that specific element using JavaScript here? So I want the variable amount to equal that input box. Essentially, that's where we're going with this. So how can we use JavaScript to grab that specific element? Very similar to what we did with the button earlier. Yeah. Yes, let's do a document. What else would you suggest here? Okay. Yeah, what did I call it? Checking amount? Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. So that should grab that specific input box. Now, if we want to grab the actual value from the value that the user inputs, what would be a JavaScript method that we could use for that? To grab the value from something. Yeah, so we could do just .value. So in jQuery, we're going to use .val, but in vanilla JavaScript, we can use a .value. So that should grab the value from that box once we click the button. And I'm going to go ahead and console log the amount. I just want to make sure that this is working. So I'm going to console log the amount to make sure that my stuff's wired up correctly. So let's go back to our ATM. And let's just put in a value and click deposit. And cool, so it looks like we are getting that return value. So this 33 is down here in the bottom, right off the screen there. Oops.
So when you put in console.log and then parentheses amount,
Yeah.
that means that amount is equal to the value of the ticket. That's why I come back 33.
Say it one more time.
So in the amount in console.log on line 4.
Yeah.
So the amount in the parentheses means that it means the value in the checking amount that we put in the HTML.
Yeah, so we're declaring a variable amount and we're assigning the value of that element.
Right. That's why it comes back whatever value you put in.
Yeah, exactly. Cool, that's great. So I do have one question though. So are we getting back, is this a number that we're getting back here? Is this 33 a number? What do you guys think it is?
I think it's a number.
Okay, any other guesses?
I don't know what like in terms of what it means. I mean,
So let me ask you this. Is 33 a number or a string right now?
oh, it's a
Yeah, it's actually a string. So we're going to have to take one more step to convert it to a number so that we can add stuff to it. Huh? We're not going to put it in quotes, but there's a cool little JavaScript operator called type of. So let's just confirm what type of object this amount is, what type of variable we're getting back. So just for funsies, let's type in type of right here, just so we can see. This is a really handy JavaScript operator because when we look in the console, I mean, it looks like a number. I don't know the difference. So let's refresh this and let's type in 33 again. click deposit, and it turns out that it is a string. That's the type of object. A string's not really going to help us if we want to do addition, subtraction, things like that, right? So using JavaScript, how could we convert that string to a number or an integer? So JavaScript has a cool handy-dandy method that will do that for us. And it's called, right down here, parse int, or parse integer. Yeah, good. So we're essentially going to get that user input, and let's go ahead and coerce it into an integer. And this is going to be really helpful, again, if we're wanting to add and subtract. We're not going to be able to add and subtract strings from numbers and such. So we want to make sure that that user input is an integer. So now if we refresh and put in another value here. Cool. So now JavaScript is telling us that amount is a type of number. So we're in good shape. That's where we want to be. Again, I just use the console log just to kind of check my math and such. A little bit of a debugging tool for me. So that's why we have that there. So is everyone able to return the number data type now? Great. Mohammed, you good?
You had to put parentheses right after the integer.
Correct, yeah. So we're going to wrap this whole thing, whatever the user inputs, we're going to change that entire thing. We're going to parse it into an integer. Now, if the user types in some letters or something, that's a whole other issue. We're not going to worry about that right now. We'll assume that our user knows what numbers are. Cool. So that's good. So that's step one. We are successfully getting back the user input as a integer. Oh, one other cool thing. So let's consider this. So right now, once we click the button, we capture the user input. How are we going to clear out the box so that we can type in other stuff? How could we do that? Just kind of a polite thing to do. We can go in here and like manually delete it and put in other stuff, but we want to have a pleasing user experience. So how can we clear it out by default once we click deposit? So let's take a look here. Yep.
Like, I'm just looking ahead. It looks like you're just assigning that a null value or empty.
Yeah, just an empty string. So yeah, let's take a look at that. So right here, so the value method both captures user input, and you can also set data with it as well. This is going to be the same thing with jQuery we'll look tomorrow. There's an HTML, there's a text, there's a val. So you can both capture input and you can also set information. So here, once we grab the user info, let's just go ahead and reset it to be nice and polite. So essentially, let's copy this line here, or if you want to type it out manually. And let's make the value just an empty string. So this should clear out the value, and then it'll insert the placeholder text, which is enter an amount. We can see the placeholder text right here, enter an amount. So let's check that bad boy out. Put in an amount and click deposit, and cool. So now it's a pleasing user experience. Cleans it out so we can enter other amounts afterwards. Cool.
Why does it do that? Just because it's an empty string, so every time you enter a value, it just resets back.
Yeah, so, and again, it's going to read from top to bottom. So we're going to capture the user input. We're going to console log it. We can take that out if we want. And then we're going to grab that same selector, and we're going to set the value to just an empty string.
Right.
It's kind of a way of just clearing out the thing.
So it's also like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like we said, so there's a couple of methods like this in JavaScript and jQuery. They can both capture information and they can also set information. And value is one of those. Do you guys see, we'll get to this here in a few steps, but already, do you guys see any way that we could dry this up? Any opportunities to make our lives a little easier? You guys see any potential?
Those, yeah, I mean, both of those queries are identical. You're just doing different things with it.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're already reusing this piece of code, well, kind of, actually that entire piece of code, the dot value, we're already using it twice. So we already have an idea, like I already know some way I can dry this up and make my life a little easier going forward. So just something to keep in mind. We'll dry up our stuff in a few steps, but you can already see the value in drying up this code. I'm going to go ahead and delete that console log for now. Actually, don't do that. Let's just get rid of the type of. Let's keep track of the amount, though. That'll be helpful. All right, so is everyone good? We can put it in amount, we can submit it, and then it'll clear out. Amani, you good? Cool, okay. Great, so step 2, persist the balance. So right now we're able to capture the user input, but we're gonna wanna persist that in some way, right? So we can add to it, subtract from it, things like that. So how would you guys suggest we approach that problem? What would be a good way of keeping track of the balance as we make deposits, as we withdraw, things like that?
Going to assign that amount to a variable.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of like a counter of such. We're just counting the amount of money in this account. So we want to create a variable. Where should we put that variable? Our checking account balance, essentially. Where would we want to put that? Could we put it in the checking deposit function? Okay. What if we want to withdraw from that variable? If we put well, let's consider this. So we have two functions that are going to need access to one variable, right? So what would probably be, where should we probably put that variable if two functions are going to use it? Yeah, let's put it outside of the function. Let's be polite about it. Let's actually declare that variable out here. I'm just going to call it checking balance. So since I'm going to have more than one function grabbing this variable, I want to keep it outside of those two functions, just to keep it nice and tidy. So right now, checking balance is what data type?
String.
Why is it a string?
Because it's like function without any.
Well, have we assigned anything to checking balance? We just declared it, right? So essentially it's stateless. It isn't a data type. We just created this container called checking balance. It could be a string, it could be a number, it could be anything we want. But if we want it to be a number, which is essentially what we want to do, I don't want this to blow up on me. So I'm just going to go ahead and assign this to 0. So checking balance is now a number data type, and it's also going to start our counter somewhere. So when we deposit money, it's going to be 0 plus whatever we deposit. Great, so we declared our checking balance variable. So we're getting the user input. How could we add or subtract? In this case, we're going to add because we're depositing. How can we add the user input to that variable? How could we approach that?
So you probably want to put that.
Okay, yeah. Okay. And what do we want to do to the balance?
So when you're depositing, you're adding money. So you want to add it to the variable amount.
Something like that?
Sure.
Okay. What do you guys think? So you're on the right track, Dennis. So we have our checking balance that we want to add the amount to. The amount is the user input. Is there maybe a cleaner way to do this? Yeah? Okay. One thing we could do is we could use a plus equals. So what does this operator do for us? If we do checking balance plus equals amount.
That adds the amount to the checking balance.
Yeah, it's going to add the amount and the same checking. It does two things. It adds the amount and it makes checking balance equal to, so it's plus equals. Yeah, it's a really handy operator there. So let's check that out. I'm going to move my console log. Well, let me ask you guys this. Right now where my console log is it going to register the new amount? Let's check that out. So right now my amount, it captures the user input. Oh, excuse me. We want to capture the checking balance. Let's do that. Then I'm going to move that console log below checking balance right here. And why do I want to do that? So this console log was up here on like line 6, but now it's below this line. And why do I want to move that console log right here?
You want to check if it works. It's just like a debug. You want to check if it works after depositing money.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, it'd probably work either way, but I want to make sure that it's, because either way it's going to check this after it updates, but I want to make sure it's below the actual adding of the amount. So let's check that bad boy out. Let's refresh here, and let's add $10. Cool. So we're now seeing the user input and the running balance of the checking balance. I can do this. I'll do that just for funsies. So we have our user input. Here's the balance. Let's add another $10. Cool. So yeah, so it looks like we're updating our stuff accordingly. So is everyone able to add and persist new amounts? What happens if we put, so right now our withdrawal button is not working, yes? But what's going to happen if we put a negative amount in the deposit?
The checking balance will go down.
Yeah, so just a little kind of quirky thing. You know, we can deal with that later. But yeah, so that's one little quirk. So if we deposit a negative number, it's actually going to go down. And that's something that we can debug once we get the other buttons working. Just something to think about. Cool. So was everyone able to capture the input and increase and such? Okay. We good? Any questions so far? Just guys following along and such? Question? Okay, cool. All right, step 3. So let's update the DOM. So we're actually, we got the logic working, which is good. So now that we're able to capture and add the new amounts to the checking balance, let's update the DOM with that new information, because right now our DOM is still reflecting a 0 balance. So let's do some more DOM manipulation. And how would you guys suggest we do this? So now once we get the new checking balance, we want to send it back and update the DOM. What would be maybe a first step for this? Okay. So this is what we want to update, right? So what would be a strategy for updating that with JavaScript? Yeah, we can add an ID. Another way to approach this, interestingly, we're going to go the ID route just because it's a little cleaner. But we have two balances, right? We have like the savings balance and the checking balance. So one thing we could do, since they both have a class, one way to approach this is we could do get elements by class name. And what is that going to return?
I mean, both are.
Yeah, it would return an array of the checking and the savings. And what could we do if we just wanted to manipulate the checking? Well, if we did it the class name way.
The index.
Yeah, we just do index 0. That's really good. Yeah, so that's one way we get. There's probably, I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but we're going to do it with an ID. But just to point out, that's something to think about. You could access it by classes, and it's going to return 2 elements. And then you could just grab the first one to play with right here.
Well, we can do that in JavaScript.
Yeah, we're going to do it in JavaScript. But just kind of keeping the theme of using IDs and such and specificity, let's add an ID to this div. And it's also a good naming convention, so it may be a little cleaner. If someone comes and reads our code and they just see balance, they may not fully understand it. So it's probably a good idea to add a very descriptive ID here. Let's name this ID checking balance. That's pretty straightforward, huh? So you could call this, checking balance div, anything like that. Let's call it checking balance. And then what code would we want to write to update our DOM with the new balance? How could we approach that? What would be the first step?
Get that object, right?
Yeah, good. Yeah, so the first thing we want to do is pinpoint the element that we want to manipulate. So how could we grab that one?
So here we've got an ID, just for confusion, right? The variable and the ID have the same name, but it's like having 2 marks in a class, right?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So we may want to make this a little clearer. So we could even call this something like checking balance div, checking balance display, something like that. That's a really good point. So I'm going to put div in there for now because that can get confusing. Cool. So how would we grab that particular element using JavaScript? Yeah, let's do that one. Our good old handy dandy. We use the query selector. And we'll do checking balance div. Cool. So that's step 1. So we're able to pinpoint that particular element. So now we want to update that element with the new balance. So what could be a strategy for doing that? So essentially we want to stick the checking balance into that div. Yep. Yeah, let's try that one. And what do we want that to equal? We want it to the cumulative balance, right? Yeah, that's good. I'm also going to put in a little $sign here just to be... What is this called when we have a string and we have like an add and then we have like another string or a variable? What do we call this? What are we doing here? When we add two strings together? Close. Concatenation. Yeah. Yeah, very good. All right, so let's go back here, see if this is working. So 15 bucks. Cool. So now we're updating the DOM. So let's put in 15 in there. Can add some more. Great. So that's awesome. So there's a lot of magic going on under the hood. We're not only capturing that user input, using logic to update the balance, and then we're also sending that balance back to the DOM. So we kind of have like a two-way thing going. It's pretty slick. So is everyone able to get the our checking balance div to update? Okay.
So is it a, at what point in looking around this, I did not enter a value into the field and put the deposit number, and I did not a number. So that's probably something to clean up, but what's the...
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so yet another bug that we'd want to put in some logic for. How would you suggest we approach that? What would be your thinking for that one?
I'm trying to figure out what happens first.
So let's see.
Is it something,
Well, when we click on it, it blows up on line 10 down here in the console if we're trying to debug it. And then on line 10, well, this is where it finally blows up, is here, but it looks like it's blowing up earlier because it doesn't like checking balance, or it doesn't like amount, actually. And why is that?
I mean, is it does parse integer expect to have a value to play with?
Yeah, and right now it doesn't have any value. It also, even if we put in like letters here, we're going to get that as well, right? So parse int requires, it's going to take a string and parse an integer, so that string needs to be a number, essentially a number. Yeah, so we can put in some logic for that. So how might we fix that? We may want to do some sort of checking, may want to put in some logic. Before we even parse this thing, let's confirm that it is indeed the data type of a number. So how could we write that? How would we approach that?
Let's see. I mean, are we kind of unpacking another little piece here with
yeah, we're
an if else?
kind of do it on the fly. Yeah, let's try with an if else for funsies. I think the first thing we want to do, let's just get the amount, but let's don't do anything to it, right? So once we capture that amount, this could be a string, not a number, it could be anything. So before we parse int that information, how could we check or confirm, make sure that it is indeed a valid number? Actually, we may want to, I guess another way we could do it is we could go ahead and parse int, assign that to amount, and then check that amount. So if amount is not a number, you know, maybe we just, it doesn't do anything and it calls that function again. Can we hold off on that
Yeah,
one?
I was
Let's
gonna say,
let's debug with that one, because that's a very good thing to debug. We can also look into that when we try to make sure that the deposit doesn't go negative, because right now we can deposit, like negative 100, and it's going to go negative. So obviously we want to fix that. Cool, but our DOM is refreshing with the new checking balance, so that's good. So we're almost there. So we have some CSS, and then we'll dry up some code, time permitting. So we break at 12:30, yes? Okay, cool. So I think we can get this one before lunch right here, it's number 4. So let's add some CSS. So when the balance is 0, we want it to have kind of a red background. We already have this 0 class available to us. If you go to the atm.css, we have the 0 class. It already has a background color of red, red-ish, whatever that hex code is. So there's a couple ways that we could approach this. Well, what do you guys think? What's a way that we could tell this element, hey, if you're 0, I want you to be red. If you're anything other than 0 or positive, what have you, we want that class to go away. So there's some slick ways we could do this. Maybe we'll take a look with jQuery tomorrow where we can add and remove classes. But for now, the way we are going to do it is let's go to our checking, and let's go to this div class of balance. And I'm going to go ahead and add that 0 class. So whenever this page is rendered initially, it's going to have a 0 balance. And by default, it's going to be red to start. So now when I refresh, it's automatically going to have that 0 class on that element. Now what we want to do is when we get into positive territory, we want that red to go away, and we want it just to go back to this gray background. So how might we approach that? How might we get rid of this 0 class, or change this class in general to get rid of it? Yeah, we could do that. So let's take a look here. Yes, let's throw an else if in here. So what should this look like? So what variable are we checking the balance of? Yeah. Cool. And what does this, how do you want to approach this? If it equals or is greater than or something, how do you want to set this up?
So right now it's red and 0, so the checking balance is equal to 0.
Well, we could probably do, so I did if checking balance equals 0. Okay, let's try this. There's a couple of ways to do this. So we do if checking balance equals 0, then I did query selector class name. So I did this a little different than how we may want to do it in jQuery and such. I'm literally just going to replace the class name with either balance or balance 0. This is more of a kind of a quick and dirty way to do it. I'd encourage you guys, if you want to dry up and refactor, we can come up with a more clever way to do this later. Probably add and remove the specific class name. But let's see how this works right here. So we'll do query selector, and we want to grab the checking balance div, because that's what we want to change the color of. So if the checking balance equals 0, let's change the CSS, change the class. Specifically, I'm going to make the class name balance 0. So this is going to kind of reset the HTML. So right now by default, it has a balance 0 on it, so it's red. And then let's put our else here. Then what should the else be? So if it isn't balance 0, meaning it's red, what should it be? The other state.
Else,
It'll just be that line on 17, and then you'll change,
Yeah.
and then you'll change the last.
Yeah, so let's just take out the 0. So this is dynamically going to change the class name of that div, depending on if it's a 0 balance or if it's positive. The other thing we could do is we could probably do something like the reverse. You know, if checking balance is greater than 0, so we could probably do the opposite if we wanted. Let's see if this works for us right now. So if we refresh, it's 0, and then if I add a positive number to it, so the red turns off. So that's something to work with. Do you guys see any other ways, just quick and dirty, we could dry up this code? So we looked at this up here, this query selector checking amount. Can you guys eyeball this and see any other opportunity that we can dry this up? So I see right here actually, so that line appears 3 times already, so we could probably assign that to a variable. That may make our lives a little easier. The other thing that's really efficient, if we assign this line to a variable, it's only going to have to look it up 1 time. Versus right now, each time it hits that line, it's having to load it into memory. So it's just kind of a computationally more efficient way to approach it if we assign it to a variable. Cool, so we're at time. I want to respect you guys' lunchtime. Thanks for hanging in there this morning. I think perhaps in the afternoon you guys may keep working on this, or we may have another exercise, but I'm totally around if you guys have any questions. Do you guys have anything before we break? So was this a helpful review? Do you feel like could have been a little more advanced, a little slower, a little faster? Okay, cool. Well, like I said, I'm here to help you guys. I'll be here till Wednesday. And thanks for hanging in there. And have a great lunch. I'll see you guys this afternoon. Thanks. Yeah.
So when you put in a letter, like just letters inside the enter amount deposit,
Right.
it's still gonna pop up as amount.
Yeah. So that's something we'll need to kind of debug later.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought
if you mean improve the type in 50 word versus
50?
50.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really interesting because it's like, well, surely the person that's using this is going to type in a number, but you never know. And so you gotta think of those scenarios so you can write the code to debug it. It's really important. I never assume the user is going to do what I want them to do.
People are very complex.
That's right. That's right. So yes, that's definitely something on the old debug list. Cool. So how long do you guys get for lunch usually?